Boy asks for leftovers at dinner, but what the farmer does leaves everyone shocked. Richard Miller was used to the silence when he dined alone at Country Corner, the busiest restaurant in Fairfield. At 52, the most prosperous farmer in the region had grown accustomed to the loneliness that money brought, especially after his wife passed away 2 years ago, leaving only him and his daughter Melissa to manage the fortune built over decades. That's when he felt a small presence beside his table. Looking down, he saw a boy no older than 6, wearing tattered clothes and with big eyes that carried a sadness far too heavy for his age. "Sir," the boy whispered, nervously fidgeting with his small hands, "were you really going to throw that food away?" Richard paused with his fork in the air, staring at the child who was timidly pointing at the remains of his beef stew. The restaurant, once filled with chatter and laughter, suddenly fell completely silent. Every eye turned to the farmer's table, waiting to see how the man known for his cold demeanor would react. "What's that, boy?" Richard asked, setting his fork down. "It's just... my grandma's real sick and we ain't eaten right for days," the boy explained, his voice shaky but determined. "If you ain't gonna eat it, could I take it to her?" Richard's heart lurched in a way he couldn't explain. There was something in those eyes that touched him deeply, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Without a word, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. The entire restaurant held its breath. They knew Richard Miller as a hard man who didn't tolerate weakness. They expected him to call security or simply shoo the child away. But Richard did the exact opposite. He pulled out an empty chair and placed it beside his own, patting the seat lightly. "Sit down, son," he said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard from him. The boy looked startled, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. "Go on, sit," Richard insisted. "Mrs. Clara," he called to the restaurant owner, "bring a plate just like mine for the boy here." Clara, a 60-year-old woman who ran the place with an iron fist, hurried over, visibly uneasy. "Mr. Richard, are you sure? These street kids, they what, Clara?" Richard cut her off, his gaze sharp as a blade. "How are they different from us because they're hungry?" The silence in the restaurant grew even heavier. Clara swallowed hard and retreated to the kitchen without another word. The boy still hesitated, unsure whether to sit or run. Richard reached out and gently guided him into the chair. "What's your name?" he asked, cutting a piece of sausage and placing it on the boy's plate. "Jimmy," came the quiet reply. "Jimmy Wilson." "Jimmy," Richard repeated, and for some unknown reason, a shiver ran down his spine. "And your grandma, what's her name?" "Grandma Rose, Rose Marie Wilson," Jimmy answered, beginning to eat with manners that impressed Richard. Despite his obvious hunger, the boy chewed slowly and used his fork properly. "And where do you live, Jimmy?" "In a little house way back on your farm, Mr. Richard, near the creek that dries up in summer." Richard felt the world spin around him. That description. He knew that place all too well. It was the old house where he'd been born and raised with his mother, before he'd bought his own land and built the empire he had today. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. "Jimmy," Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady, "do you know how long you've lived there?" "Forever, Mr. Richard. Grandma Rose says we were born in that house, that my mama was born there too, before she left when I was real little." The farmer felt a lump in his throat. Every word from the boy seemed like a piece of a puzzle he didn't want to put together, yet they fit perfectly with his memories. "And your grandmother, was she ever married?" "Yes. Grandpa John died when I was 3. But Grandma always talks about her brother who got rich and important. She says one day he'll come back for us." Jimmy smiled for the first time, showing small white teeth. "But I think it's just her fever talk, you know. Rich folks don't care about the poor." Richard had to lean on the table. His hands trembled so much he could barely hold his water glass. Rose Marie Wilson, his younger sister, 10 years his junior. Their last argument had been terrible, full of accusations and wounds that seemed impossible to heal. "Jimmy," he managed to say, "do you have any other siblings?" "I got Annie, who's 4, and Johnny, who's still a baby. But they stayed with Grandma, 'cause she's too weak to leave the house." At that moment, the restaurant door swung open forcefully and Melissa stormed in like a hurricane. At 26, Richard's daughter had inherited not just her mother's beauty, but also her strong temper and firm opinions on how things ought to be. "Dad, what is this?" she asked loudly, drawing attention from everyone around the table. "The whole town's talking about you having dinner with some street kid." "Melissa, lower your voice," Richard said firmly, "and come greet Jimmy." "Greet him? Dad, have you lost your mind? This kid probably has diseases, might have stolen something, could what, Melissa?" Richard stood, his voice echoing through the entire restaurant. "Could be hungry? Could need help? What terrible crime is that?" Jimmy, frightened by the argument, tried to get up from his chair. "I'll go, Mr. Richard. I don't want to cause trouble for nobody." "You're not leaving," Richard said gently, holding the boy's arm. "Finish your meal in peace." Melissa was red with shame and anger. "Dad, all our friends are watching this. Our reputation, our business, what will people think of us? If our friends judge us for feeding a hungry child, then they're not our friends," Richard replied, sitting back down. "And if our business depends on ignoring others' suffering, then it's not a business I care for." The argument was drawing more and more attention. Some people pulled out their phones and began recording. Richard noticed but didn't care. Something more important than his reputation was happening here. "Jimmy." He turned his attention back to the boy, who was eating quietly, trying to make himself invisible. "Tell me more about your grandmother. Did she ever tell you the name of that brother who left?" "Yeah, Richard. Same as your name, Mr. Richard." Jimmy smiled again. "She always says her Richard was the smartest boy in the world, studied hard and got important, but that he forgot about her when he got rich." The world stopped for Richard. Every beat of his heart echoed in his ears like a drum. Rose. His sister Rose, whom he'd left behind 20 years ago after that terrible fight that tore the family apart. He remembered it like it was yesterday, Rose accusing him of forgetting his roots, of becoming a cold, calculating man. He, for his part, was tired of supporting relatives who only showed up when they needed money and had said things he should never have said, words that cut deeper than any knife. "Jimmy," Richard said, his voice choked up, "when you finish eating, how about taking me to meet your grandmother?" "You want to meet Grandma Rose?" The boy's eyes lit up. "She'll be so happy. She always says she wants to ask her brother for forgiveness before what, Jimmy?" "Before she goes to meet Grandpa John up in heaven," the boy whispered. "She's really sick, Mr. Richard. Coughs up blood sometimes and can't even get out of bed." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. His sister was sick, maybe seriously sick, and he hadn't known a thing. While he lived in his big house, with all the comforts money could buy, Rose had been suffering in silence in the same little house where they'd grown up together. "Dad," Melissa approached again, this time with a quieter voice. "Are you okay? You've gone pale." Richard looked at his daughter, then at Jimmy, who was finishing his meal with manners that contrasted sharply with his torn and dirty clothes. "Mrs. Clara," he called to the restaurant owner, "I'd like 5 large takeout meals, with the best of everything you've got." "5 meals, but Mr. Richard?" "5 meals," he repeated, pulling out his wallet. "And I also want 5 bottles of water, 2 sodas, and that chocolate cake in the display case." While Clara prepared the order, Richard crouched down to meet Jimmy at eye level. "You're going to take me to your grandmother now, okay? But are you sure, sir? The path is kinda rough, and the house is a bit messy." "I'm sure," Richard smiled, and for the first time in years it was a genuine smile. "I really want to meet Mrs. Rose." Melissa followed her father and Jimmy to the pickup truck, grumbling about the awkward situation. Richard drove in silence down the dirt road leading to the back of his property, a path he hadn't taken in over 2 decades. The landscape was exactly as he remembered. The creek Jimmy had mentioned, the fruit trees he and Rose used to climb as kids, the wooden bridge his father had built with his own hands. "It's right there," Jimmy pointed to a small, simple house painted in faded blue. "Grandma's in the back room." Richard parked the truck and sat still for a moment, staring at the house. It was smaller than he remembered, more worn down, but it was still the place where he'd taken his first steps, spoken his first words, dreamed his first dreams. "Dad, what's this about?" Melissa asked. "Why do you know this place?" "Because I was born here, Melissa," Richard answered, stepping out of the truck. "This is the house where I grew up with my mother and my sister." "Sister? What sister? You never told me about any sister." "It's a long story," Richard sighed, grabbing the bags of food. "A story I hope I can fix today." Jimmy ran ahead, shouting excitedly, "Grandma Rose! Grandma Rose! I brought a surprise for you!" Richard followed the boy through the front door, which was open. The house was simple but clean and tidy. It smelled of rubbing alcohol and homemade remedies, scents he associated with makeshift healthcare. "Jimmy, my angel, what's all this fuss about?" A weak voice called from the back room. "I brought a man here to meet you, Grandma. A really nice man who bought me dinner." Richard stopped at the bedroom door and felt his legs tremble. There, lying on a simple bed, was Rose, his little sister, who now looked 80 instead of 42. She was too thin, pale, with deep circles under her eyes, but her gaze still held the same mischievous sparkle he remembered from childhood. Rose looked at the man in the doorway, blinking several times as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, then burst into tears. "Richard?" she whispered. "Good Lord, is it really you?" "Hi, Rose," Richard said, his voice choked. "How are you?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. Rose tried to sit up in bed, but a violent coughing fit overtook her. Richard rushed to her side, helping her settle back against the pillows. "Easy, easy," he said, holding her hand, which was icy and painfully thin. "Don't push yourself." "Richard, my brother," Rose sobbed, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. I thought I'd die without seeing you again." "Don't say that," Richard said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're not going to die. I won't allow it." "Grandma Rose," a sweet little voice called from the other room. "Jimmy's back." A small girl, about 4 years old, appeared in the doorway, carrying a baby in her arms. It was Annie, the one Jimmy had mentioned, and little Johnny. "My grandbabies," Rose smiled through her tears. "Come meet your Uncle Richard." Annie eyed the man in the hat suspiciously, but Jimmy encouraged her. "He's nice, Annie. He gave me food and brought more for us." "Really?" Annie asked, still hesitant. "Really?" Richard replied, opening one of the bags. "I brought a whole feast here." Melissa, who had been standing in the doorway watching the scene, finally grasped the magnitude of what was happening. That sick woman in bed really was her aunt. Those children were her cousins, and she had spent years not knowing they existed. "Dad," she whispered, "why did you two fight?" Rose and Richard exchanged glances. There was so much history between them, so much hurt, so much wounded pride. "It was my fault," Rose said, trying to sit up straighter. "I got jealous when you became rich, Richard. I thought you'd forget where you came from, forget who your people were. And I was too proud to admit you were right about some things," Richard answered. "I really did pull away from everyone. I thought money fixed everything, that I didn't need anyone." "And where's the children's mother?" Melissa asked. Rose's expression darkened. "My daughter Carly. She left when Johnny was born. Said she couldn't take the poverty anymore, that she'd try her luck in the big city. She sent a letter 6 months ago saying she married a man from New York, but we never heard from her again." "And the children's father?" "Mark was a good man, but he died in a work accident when Annie was 2. Since then, it's just been me and them." Richard processed everything, a mix of anger, sadness, and guilt nearly suffocating him. While he had been building wealth, his family had been struggling. While he prided himself on his independence, his sister had been raising 3 children alone, sick and with no resources. "Rose, you need medical care. That cough, this weakness." "I don't have money for doctors, Richard. The medicine from the clinic doesn't help much." "Forget about money," Richard said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Henry right now. He'll come today." "Richard, you don't have to go to the trouble. It's no trouble, Rose. It's my duty, a brother's duty, one I should have fulfilled a long time ago. As Richard made the calls, Jimmy proudly showed his sisters the food he'd brought. Melissa watched the children with a strange feeling in her chest. They were polite, affectionate with each other, and treated Rose with touching care. "Grandma, Mr. Richard is just like you said," Jimmy remarked, chewing on a piece of cake. "He really is nice." "Kinder than I deserve," Rose replied, looking at her brother who had just finished his phone call. "Dr. Henry will be here in an hour," Richard announced, "and I already called Martha, my secretary. She'll arrange everything you need. Clothes, medicine, the children's documents." "Richard, wait." Rose held her brother's arm. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, Rose, it's family. It's what should have happened from the start. But I said horrible things to you 20 years ago. I said you were proud that you'd turned your back on where you came from. And you were right," Richard interrupted. "Partly you were right. I really did distance myself from everything and everyone. I built a wall around myself and called it success." "Dad," Melissa approached, "can I talk to you outside?" Richard followed his daughter to the front porch of the house. Melissa was visibly emotional, but also confused. "Why did you never tell me about Aunt Rose?" "Because I was ashamed," Richard admitted. "Ashamed of the fight, ashamed of my pride, ashamed of abandoning my own sister. But Dad, those kids, they're our family, and we didn't even know they existed." "I knew," Richard sighed. "I always knew Rose was here. Many times I thought about coming to look for her, but pride always won out. And what if Jimmy hadn't shown up at the restaurant today?" Richard didn't answer, but they both knew. If it hadn't been for the courage of a 6-year-old boy asking for scraps, Rose might have died without them ever reconciling. Dr. Henry arrived promptly, carrying his case of modern equipment. A man in his 50s, he had been Richard's private physician for many years, known for his competence and discretion. "Good evening, Mr. Richard," he greeted politely. "Where's the patient?" "In the back room, doctor. It's my sister." Dr. Henry showed no surprise, simply following Richard to the room where Rose was trying to tidy herself to receive the doctor. "Good evening, Mrs. Rose. I'm Dr. Henry. Your brother asked me to check on you." The examination lasted nearly an hour. Dr. Henry examined Rose carefully, asked many questions about her symptoms, and finally asked to speak with Richard privately. "Mr. Richard," the doctor said gravely, "your sister has pneumonia, advanced pneumonia that needs immediate treatment. Is it serious?" "Yes. If left untreated, it could be fatal in a matter of days. She needs to be hospitalized right away, start strong antibiotics, and undergo respiratory therapy." "Then let's admit her now. I've already called the hospital. They're preparing a private room. But Mr. Richard, there's one more thing." "What is it?" "The children are malnourished. Not severely, but they are. And from what I could see, they don't have regular medical care. It would be good to give them all a full checkup." Richard felt a heavy weight in his chest. Not only was Rose sick, but the children were also suffering the consequences of their precarious situation. "Doctor, do whatever's necessary. Don't worry about the cost." "Very well. I'll call an ambulance for Mrs. Rose, and tomorrow morning the children can come to the office for their exams." When Dr. Henry left, Richard returned to the room where Rose was trying to prepare for the hospital. "You don't need to bring anything," he said gently. "The hospital will provide everything." "Richard, what about the children? They've never been away from me. They'll stay with me and Melissa, at my house." "Your house?" "Richard, they're simple kids. They don't know how to behave in a rich person's home. They know how to behave like well-raised children, and that's what matters. And my house has always been theirs, Rose. I was just too stubborn to see it." The ambulance arrived shortly after, and Rose was taken to the hospital amid the tearful protests of the children, especially Annie, who clung to her grandmother as if saying goodbye forever. "Grandma Rose will be back soon, Annie," Jimmy comforted his sister. "Mr. Richard said he'll take good care of her." "That's right," Richard confirmed, lifting Annie into his arms. "And while your grandmother gets better at the hospital, you'll stay at my house. There are big rooms, a TV, and a kitchen full of delicious food." "Can we play too?" Annie asked, still sniffling. "You can play as much as you want. There's a huge backyard with trees to climb and a pond with little fish. On the way to Richard's house, Melissa watched the children in the back seat of the truck. Jimmy held baby Johnny with surprising care for a 6-year-old, while Annie stared wide-eyed out the window. "Dad," Melissa whispered, "they're home. It's very humble." "Humble, but full of love," Richard replied. "Something our big house has been missing." When they arrived at Richard's property, the children were amazed by the size of the house, which looked like a castle to them. It was a large, elegant building with well-kept gardens and a pool that shimmered under the outdoor lights. "Wow," Jimmy whispered. "Is this where you live, sir?" "This is where we live," Richard corrected. "Starting today, you live here too." Mrs. Nancy, the housekeeper who had worked there for 15 years, greeted the children with the surprise and efficiency that defined her work. She quickly prepared warm baths, found clothes that would fit them temporarily, and made a nutritious snack for the little ones. "Mr. Richard," she said softly, "the children are very thin, and the baby needs vitamins." "We'll take care of all that first thing tomorrow, Mrs. Nancy. For now, I just want them to feel at home." "And how long will they stay?" "Forever, if it's up to me," Richard answered, surprising even himself with the firmness of his reply. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Richard woke up early and went to check on the children. He found Jimmy already awake, sitting on his bed and looking out the window of the room that had been prepared for him. "Good morning, Jimmy. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, sir, but I'm worried about Grandma Rose." "How about we call the hospital and see how she did last night?" Richard called Dr. Henry, who said Rose had a quiet night and was responding well to treatment. "She wants to talk to the children," the doctor said. "Of course. Let's have breakfast, and then we'll go to the hospital." Breakfast was an eye-opening experience for Richard. The children ate politely and gratefully, thanking him for everything they were given. Jimmy helped Annie serve herself and took touching responsibility for baby Johnny. "Jimmy," Richard said, "you're very responsible for a 6-year-old." "Grandma Rose always said a man has to take care of his family," Jimmy replied seriously. "When I grow up, I'll work and take care of her and my siblings." "And what kind of work do you want to do when you grow up?" "I want to be an engineer, like the man who came to fix the bridge near our house. He said engineers build houses and bridges and lots of cool stuff." Richard smiled. Intelligence and ambition seemed to run in the family. At the hospital, Rose looked noticeably better. Color had returned to her face and her breathing seemed less labored. "How are my treasures?" she asked as the children rushed into the room. "Grandma Rose!" Annie threw herself into her grandmother's arms. "Uncle Richard's house is huge. It has a pool and everything." "And he said we're going to live there forever," Jimmy added excitedly. Rose looked at Richard with a worried expression. "Richard, I don't want you to feel obligated." "Rose, stop that. I don't feel obligated. I feel privileged. These children have brought a joy to my home that I haven't felt in years." "But they'll be a handful. They'll need school, clothes, so many things." "And they'll have all of that," Richard assured her, "including something I never had after I got rich. A real family." Dr. Henry arrived to do Rose's morning checkup. "Good news," he announced. "Mrs. Rose is responding very well to treatment. If she keeps this up, she could be discharged in a week." "A whole week?" Annie pouted. "That's so long." "It'll fly by, sweetheart," Rose comforted her granddaughter. "And you'll be well taken care of with Uncle Richard and your cousin Melissa." "Cousin Melissa?" Jimmy looked at Melissa with renewed interest. "Yep," Melissa smiled, feeling included in the family for the first time. "I'm your cousin, and I'll teach you how to swim in the pool." "Really?" Annie's eyes sparkled. "Really? And I'll also teach Jimmy how to play video games." "What's a video game?" Melissa laughed, realizing how much those children had grown up without luxuries she took for granted. "It's a game on the TV. You'll love it." In the following days, the routine at Richard's house changed completely. The children brought life and energy to rooms that had once been silent. Jimmy turned out to be extremely smart, quickly learning everything he was taught. Annie was affectionate and talkative, filling the house with her laughter. And baby Johnny, after a few days of medical care and proper nutrition, was proving to be a healthy, bright little boy. Richard enrolled Jimmy and Annie in the best private school in town, took care of missing paperwork, and began sorting out the children's legal status. It was during one of these errands that the first complication arose. Richard was at the courthouse when the clerk informed him of a problem. "Mr. Richard, there's a search and custody order for the children." "What? An order from whom?" "From their father, a man named Mark Oliver. He showed up here yesterday claiming the children were taken illegally from his home." Richard felt his blood run cold. "But Mark died 2 years ago. Rose told me." "Apparently not, sir. He's alive and wants the children back." Richard left the courthouse in a panic and rushed to the hospital where Rose was still recovering. "Rose," he said, trying to stay calm, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened with Mark." "Why are you asking, Richard?" "Because he showed up at the courthouse demanding the children back." Rose paled even further. "He didn't die, Richard. I lied to you." "What do you mean you lied?" "Mark. He left me when he found out I was sick. Said he wasn't going to stick around to care for a sick woman and a bunch of kids. He walked out and never looked back. Never sent money, never asked about his children." "Then why did you lie?" "Because I was ashamed," Rose began to cry. "Ashamed to admit I chose wrong, that I was abandoned. It was easier to say he died than to explain he just didn't want us." Richard processed the information with a mix of anger and worry. And now he comes back wanting the children, after 2 years. "Richard, he must have found out you're taking care of them. He's probably thinking about money." "What money?" "Child support maybe, or some kind of blackmail. Mark was always greedy." Richard left the hospital and went straight to his lawyer's office, attorney Michael Andrews, a man experienced in family law. "Attorney Michael, I need your help urgently." Richard explained the whole situation to the attorney, who listened carefully while taking notes. "Mr. Richard, this is a delicate situation. Mark is the biological father of the children, so he has legal rights over them. But he abandoned them for 2 years. That works in your favor, but it's not enough to completely strip his rights. We'll need to prove both financial and emotional abandonment." "Is that possible?" "Yes, but it'll take work. We'll need witnesses, documents, evidence that he truly abandoned the children." "And in the meantime, where do the children stay?" "That depends on the judge. He might rule they stay with you temporarily or send them back to their father." Richard felt a despair he hadn't known in years. The thought of losing Jimmy, Annie, and Johnny was unbearable. In just a few days, those children had become his family, his reason for living. When he got home, Richard found the children playing in the yard under Melissa's watch. Jimmy was trying to teach Annie how to ride a bike, while Johnny napped under the shade of a tree. "Uncle Richard," Jimmy ran to meet him, "look what I learned at school today." The boy proudly showed a drawing he'd made, a big house with several people in front, all holding hands. "Who are these people, Jimmy?" "It's us. You, Melissa, me, Annie, Johnny, and Grandma Rose when she gets out of the hospital. Our family." Richard had to fight back tears in front of the boy. How could he explain that they might have to be separated? "Jimmy," he crouched down to the boy's level, "tell me something. Do you remember your father?" Jimmy's face darkened instantly. "He's not my father. Fathers don't abandon their kids." "But do you remember him?" "Yeah, he used to yell at Grandma Rose a lot. Said we were too much trouble. One day he left and Grandma cried. Do you miss him?" "No," Jimmy answered firmly. "I have you now. You're more of a father to me than he ever was." That night, Richard barely slept. The next day, Mark showed up at his door. He was a man in his 30s, unkempt, with an expression Richard immediately distrusted. There was something in his eyes that suggested opportunism. "You're Richard Miller?" Mark asked bluntly. "I am, and you must be Mark. I'm here for my kids." "Your kids?" Richard kept his voice calm, but anger burned inside. "Where were you when they were starving, when Rose was sick, when Jimmy had to beg for food on the street? That's none of your business. They're my kids and I'm taking them. What changed? Why do you want them back now?" Mark smiled in a way that confirmed Richard's suspicions. Let's just say my situation improved, and I found out they're being well taken care of by a rich man. You want money? I want my kids, but maybe we can work something out. What kind of deal? Child support, a very generous amount, and maybe I'll let them visit you sometimes. Richard nearly lost control, wanting to strike the man, but he held back. Violence wouldn't solve anything, and Mark was clearly trying to provoke him. I won't make any deal, Richard said. If you want the kids, you'll have to prove in court that you're fit to care for them. Oh, I'll prove it, Mark laughed. And when I do, you'll never see them again, unless you change your mind about our negotiation. After Mark left, Richard immediately called Attorney Michael. Attorney, the children's father was just here. It's clear he wants money, not the kids. That helps our case. But unfortunately, wanting money isn't a crime. We'll need more evidence. What kind of evidence? Witnesses who can testify he abandoned them. People who can confirm that he never provided material or emotional support. Documents proving the children were in a state of neglect. And where will we find these witnesses? In the neighborhood where they lived. At the health clinic where Rose was treated. At the school where the children should have been enrolled. Everywhere his absence should have been noticed. Richard spent the following days chasing after witnesses and evidence. He spoke to neighbors from their old house, health clinic staff, and people in the community who knew about Rose and the children's situation. Everyone confirmed the same story. Mark had simply vanished 2 years ago, leaving Rose sick and alone with 3 small children. He never checked in, never sent money, never asked about his children's well-being. Mrs. Clara, from the restaurant where it all began, was one of the most important witnesses. I've seen that boy asking for food for months, she told the attorney. Always polite, always worried about his family. If his father had been around, the child wouldn't have had to endure such humiliation. During this time, the children continued living in Richard's house, seemingly unaware of the legal battle unfolding. Richard and Melissa did everything to maintain a normal routine, but their worry was visible. Rose was discharged from the hospital and went straight to her brother's house. She was much better but still weak and in need of care. Richard, she said on her first night home, I feel guilty about all this. Why, Rose? If I hadn't lied about Mark being dead, you could have been better prepared for this. Rose, you did what you thought was best at the time. Don't blame yourself. But now he might take the children away. He won't take them, Richard said firmly. I won't allow it. But what if the judge rules in his favor? Then we'll appeal, and if that doesn't work, we'll find another way. But I won't give up on these children. The court hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Richard arrived at the courthouse accompanied by Attorney Michael, Rose, Melissa, and several witnesses willing to testify on their behalf. Mark showed up with a public defender and an arrogant attitude that irritated everyone present. The judge, Judge Frank Mitchell, was known for his seriousness and always prioritizing children's welfare in his rulings. We'll begin by hearing the petitioner, the judge announced. Mark's lawyer argued that his client had been away temporarily for work reasons, but was now able to care for his children. He also claimed the children had been taken without his consent. When it was Attorney Michael's turn, he presented a solid defense based on evidence and testimony. Your Honor, he said, the petitioner didn't step away temporarily. He abandoned the children and their sick mother for 2 full years. We have witnesses here confirming he never showed interest in his children's well-being. One by one, the witnesses were called. Mrs. Clara spoke about Jimmy asking for food at the restaurant. Neighbors described the dire conditions Rose and the children lived in. The health clinic doctor confirmed Mark had never taken the children for checkups or shown concern for their health. And now, Attorney Michael said, I'd like to call the key witness, Jimmy Wilson. Objection. Mark's lawyer stood up. The child is too young to testify. Overruled, the judge replied. Jimmy is 6, old enough to express his feelings and preferences. Jimmy was called forward, visibly nervous but determined. The judge knelt to speak to him at eye level. Jimmy, do you know why you're here? Yes, sir, Your Honor. You will decide if I can keep living with Uncle Richard or if I have to leave with Mark. And what would you like to happen? I want to stay with Uncle Richard, Jimmy answered without hesitation. He takes care of us, takes care of Grandma Rose, put me in school. He's my family now. And how do you feel about your father? Jimmy looked at Mark and then back at the judge. He's not my father, Your Honor. Fathers don't abandon their children. Fathers care, protect, stay by your side when you're scared. Uncle Richard did all that. Mark just left. Jimmy's testimony moved everyone in the courtroom. Even the judge needed a moment to compose himself. Any further questions? He asked the attorneys. Mark's lawyer tried to ask a few things, but Jimmy held his ground with impressive strength for his age. Your Honor, Jimmy said before returning to his seat, can I say one more thing? Of course. I know you have to follow the law, and I don't understand much about laws, but I understand family, and my family is right there. He pointed to Richard, Rose, and Melissa. They really love me. Please don't separate us. The judge called a 2-hour recess to review all the testimonies and evidence. Richard, Rose, and Melissa left the courtroom in silence, each lost in their own thoughts and worries. What now? Rose asked. Now we wait, Attorney Michael replied. We've presented a strong case. Jimmy's testimony was especially touching. But is it enough? I hope so. Judge Frank is known for prioritizing children's well-being above all else. When they returned to court, the tension was palpable. The judge entered, everyone stood, and he began reading his decision. After reviewing all testimonies and evidence, I conclude the following. The petitioner, Mark Oliver, did indeed abandon his minor children for a period of 2 years, providing neither material nor emotional support. Richard felt his heart race. On the other hand, the judge continued, the children have found in the respondent, Richard Miller, not only material care but also affection, education, and emotional stability. Mark looked visibly uncomfortable in his seat. Considering that the children's best interests must always prevail, I rule that custody of Jimmy, Annie, and Johnny shall remain with Richard Miller, who has proven capable of providing a healthy and loving family environment. Tears streamed down Richard's face. Rose hugged Melissa, and they both cried with joy. However, the judge wasn't finished. I acknowledge that Mark Oliver is the biological father and retains the right to supervised visitation, provided he demonstrates genuine concern for his children's well-being, not just financial motives. Objection, Your Honor, Attorney Michael stood. The children have clearly stated they do not wish to see the petitioner. Objection sustained. Visitation will only occur if the children express a desire to see their father, always with psychological supervision. Otherwise, contact will not be forced. Mark stood up furiously. This is unfair. They're my kids. Mr. Mark, the judge replied firmly, your children are human beings with feelings and rights, not property. You had 2 years to show paternal interest and chose not to. The court cannot force children to love someone who abandoned them. I'll appeal this decision. That is your right. But until then, the ruling stands. Leaving the courtroom, Richard hugged Jimmy, who understood perfectly what had happened. Uncle Richard, does this mean we can stay together forever? It does, son. Forever. And Grandma Rose too? Grandma Rose too. All of us. Together. That night, there was a celebration at Richard's house. Mrs. Nancy prepared a special dinner, and even Attorney Michael was invited to celebrate the victory. Uncle Richard, Annie asked during dinner, are you our dad now? Richard looked at Rose, who smiled and nodded. If you want me to be, yes, I'd be honored to be your father. And is Melissa our sister? Yes, I am, Melissa replied, kissing the girl's forehead. An older sister who'll teach you all sorts of fun things. And will Grandma Rose live here forever? Forever, Rose confirmed, unless Uncle Richard gets tired of us. I'll never get tired, Richard said, looking around the table at all the smiling faces. You're the greatest gift life has ever given me. In the months that followed, the family settled into a happy, harmonious routine. Jimmy excelled in school, showing exceptional intelligence, especially in math. Annie became the joy of the house, always singing and playing. Johnny grew healthy and bright, taking his first steps and saying his first words. Rose fully regained her health and became the loving matriarch the family needed. Melissa discovered she had a knack for caring for children and decided to study education. Richard, in turn, found a happiness he hadn't even known he was searching for. The house that was once quiet and cold was now always full of laughter, playfulness, and love. A year after that first meeting at the restaurant, Richard was dining again at Country Corner, but this time with the whole family. "Uncle Richard," Jimmy said, finishing his plate of beef stew, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, son." "Do you think if I hadn't asked for food that day, we still would have found each other?" Richard thought for a moment, looking at the people who had become his reason for living. "You know what, Jimmy? I believe real families always find a way to come together. Maybe not that day, maybe not at that restaurant, but I'm sure our paths would have crossed somehow." "Why?" "Because family love is stronger than pride, stronger than time, stronger than anything that tries to pull it apart." "And now we'll never be apart again?" Richard smiled, taking the boy's hand. "Never again, my son. Never again." Mrs. Clara approached the table with a new dessert. "On the house," she said, smiling, "for the most beautiful family in my restaurant." "Thank you, Mrs. Clara," Richard replied. "You have no idea how special this place is to us." "Oh, I think I do," she said softly. "This is where you found each other again." That night, when everyone was asleep, Richard stepped onto his porch and looked up at the starry sky. He thought about how drastically his life had changed in just 1 year. From a lonely, bitter man, he had become the patriarch of a loving, close-knit family. Rose appeared on the porch, wrapped in a robe. "Can't sleep, brother?" "I could ask you the same, just thinking about how funny life is." "Funny how?" "We spend years thinking success is about money, possessions, recognition. Then we realize true success is having people who love us and whom we love in return. And you have that now." "I do. And all because of the courage of a 6-year-old boy who wasn't ashamed to ask for help." Jimmy's always been special. Even as a little boy, he had a way of touching people's hearts. "Just like his mother," Richard smiled. "You've always had that same strength, Rose. I was just too stubborn to see it. But what matters is that you see it now, and that we're together. Forever? Forever." The two siblings stood there in silence, listening to the sounds of the night and savoring the peace they had finally found. In the children's room, Jimmy slept hugging his new stuffed bear, dreaming of the bright future he now knew awaited him. Annie murmured sweet things in her sleep, while Johnny slept soundly in his crib, surrounded by the love and security every child deserves. And Melissa, in her room, wrote in her diary about how her life had changed since gaining 3 younger siblings and a beloved aunt. About how she had learned that family isn't just about blood, but about choice, about love, about being there when needed. 2 years later, Jimmy graduated from elementary school as the top student in his class. At the ceremony, he was called to give a speech as the class representative. "My name is Jimmy Miller," he began, proudly using the surname that had been officially adopted. "And I want to talk about second chances." The audience listened in silence. 2 years ago, I was just a boy begging for food on the street to feed my family. Today I'm here because someone gave me a second chance. They didn't just give me food, they gave me an education, love, and hope." Richard, Rose, and Melissa sat in the front row, tears in their eyes. But the second chance wasn't just mine. It was also my Uncle Richard's, who learned that true wealth is having family. It was my Grandma Rose's, who recovered from a serious illness because she finally got the care she deserved. It was my cousin Melissa's, who discovered how wonderful it is to be a big sister. Jimmy looked directly at his family. "I want to tell every child here that studying is important, yes. But even more important is never giving up on your dreams, never being ashamed to ask for help when you need it, and always remembering that family is the most precious treasure there is." The audience rose in applause. Richard couldn't stop crying, proud of the boy who had practically become his son. After the ceremony, the family went home to celebrate, where they found a surprise. Mark was at the door. Richard tensed immediately, but Mark raised his hands in peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I came to say goodbye." "Goodbye." "I got a job in another state. I'm going to try to start over far from here. And the kids." Mark looked through the window. where Jimmy, Annie and Johnny played in the yard. The kids are where they belong, with the people who truly love them. Richard was surprised by Mark's change of heart. What changed? Seeing my son give that speech today, Mark confessed. Seeing the man he's becoming, the education he has, the family he found, I could never give him that. Mark, no, Richard. Let me say this. I was a terrible father. I abandoned my kids when they needed me most. You've done more for them in 2 years than I did their whole lives. Mark pulled some papers from his pocket. These are the final relinquishment of parental rights. I want you to adopt them legally, so they can have your name, your protection, your love forever. Richard took the papers with trembling hands. Are you sure about this? Absolutely. It's the only right thing I can do for them now. Mark turned to leave, but Richard called after him. Mark, if you ever want news about them, want to know how they're doing, you can reach out. I won't stop you. Thank you. But I think it's better this way. Let them be happy without the weight of my mistakes. Mark left, and Richard walked inside with the papers that would make official what was already reality. Jimmy, Annie and Johnny were his children, not just in his heart, but now in the eyes of the law. What did he want? Rose asked, concerned. To do the right thing, Richard answered, showing her the papers. Finally, to do the right thing. The adoption was finalized 3 months later in a simple courthouse ceremony with the whole family present. Jimmy, now 8 years old, signed his name for the first time as Jimmy Miller with the careful handwriting he had learned in school. Now it's official, the judge announced. You are a family in the eyes of the law. We were already a family before, Jimmy said seriously. Now it's just on paper too. Everyone laughed, touched by the boy's wisdom. 5 years passed. Jimmy, now 13, had grown into a bright young man with excellent grades and a special interest in engineering, just as he had dreamed when he was little. Annie at 9 was a smart and affectionate girl who loved to draw and paint. Johnny at 7 showed a natural talent for sports and music. Rose at 52 was in perfect health and had become the most loving grandmother one could imagine. Melissa, now a graduate in education, worked at the children's school and was engaged to a history teacher who adored the Miller family. Richard, at 58, had turned part of his land into a shelter for families in vulnerable situations, in honor of the day Jimmy had changed his life. On a winter evening, the family was gathered in the living room, each doing their own activities. Richard reading a book, Rose knitting, Melissa grading papers, Jimmy studying math, Annie drawing, and Johnny putting together a puzzle. Dad, Jimmy said, naturally using the word he had adopted years ago. Can I ask you something? Of course, son. Do you ever regret bringing me home that day? Richard stopped reading and looked at the boy who had become his son. Jimmy, that was the most important day of my life. It was the day I discovered what truly matters. And what truly matters? Family, love, being present in the lives of the people we love. Jimmy smiled and went back to his studies. Richard looked around the room, seeing his happy and united family, and felt immense gratitude for that 6-year-old boy who had mustered the courage to approach his table that day and ask only for the leftovers from his plate. Because sometimes the greatest miracles begin with the smallest gestures, and sometimes the one we think is asking for help is exactly the one who came to save us. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story and where you're watching from. Do you believe Richard made the right decision by taking in the children? Share your honest opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.